One of the most insane serial killers I have ever learned about, I still to this day believe didn't work alone. So you guys know Jack the Ripper, right? Well, this guy not only outlasted and outdid him, but he put New York in one of the biggest states of fear and taunted investigators for years. Before we get into who he is and why I don't think he acted alone, let's talk about what he did. The first kill he ever made was stabbing 2 young girls on Christmas Eve of 1975. At this time, New York was in absolute shambles. People were being killed and assaulted all the time. Robberies were happening, bodies were being found, and the police really couldn't keep up with everything, so whenever this happened, it wasn't like a big news headliner. Well, a few months later, 2 girls were shot sitting in their car. Both of them ended up surviving, but it happened so fast that they didn't have any information on the suspect. Just some .44 caliber bullets left on scene. Well, the next attack occurred whenever this couple was sitting in a car. They reported that the whole car felt like it exploded, and the girl looked over and saw a bullet wound in the guy's head. Because of the bullets used, the police were able to make the connection. So the police noticed that the same shell casing was used, and so far all victims were female with medium-length brown hair. Well, it did not take long for another attack to occur. A man approached 2 women asking for directions. When he asked, he took out a gun and shot both of them, leaving one paralyzed with a spinal injury. And then after this came another couple sitting in a car. The police, having no leads, were like, okay, we're gonna need to announce this to the public that we have a serial killer on our hands. They released the few sketches that they did have, hoping for a lead. He was announced in the paper as the .44 caliber killer. The police also let the public know that he was looking for women with medium-length brown hair. So many women during this time cut their hair, dyed it blonde, whatever, so that they didn't match this profile. After this came out, he ends up killing another girl on her way home from school, and another couple who was sitting in their car on a date. But this killing was very different. This time, he actually left a letter for the police. I'm going to insert the letter. He introduces himself as the son of Sam, and his wording is just a little off. So the news decides to write him back. So let me just talk a little bit more about this letter before we get into it. He obviously refers to his father as Sam and himself as the son of Sam. He paints his father as this very abusive figure that's essentially making him kill. He refers to himself as Beelzebub and as a brat. And we'll get to this later. So a very famous news article writer at the time named Jimmy Breslin writes to him begging him to stop. And not only does the son of Sam respond to him, but Jimmy publishes his response. This changed journalism. I'll put the response right here, but he uses words like "from the gutter," Sam's creation. Meanwhile, the public is preparing for the anniversary of his first killing. Pepper spray has been sold out. Everyone is terrified, and it just so happens on the anniversary, a blackout occurs. Looting, burning down neighborhoods, and all of the cops were working that night. But they got through the whole night without anything occurring. But not long after, another murder takes place. Robert and Stacy are attacked on their first date. Stacy is the only blonde that he ever attacked, but leaving her dead and Robert blind. After this, the police were able to collect 5 sketches. But all of them were different. Well, a woman ends up calling the police reporting suspicious activity. She was going for a walk when she saw a man hopping into his car. Instead of continuing into his car, he hops out and starts to approach her. She sees him start to take an object out of a bag, and she runs the opposite way, and then hears gunshots. Learning about all the nearby crimes, she makes the report. She also noticed that he had a parking ticket on his car. So the police find the parking tickets from that day from that area, figures out the license, and realizes the vehicle belongs to a guy named David Berkowitz. So the police call dispatchers inquiring about the ticket, and a dispatcher named Wheat Carr answers the phone, saying that she was his neighbor, and says, "Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Berkowitz. He's a very strange man who shot my dog that belonged to my father, Sam." So the police were like, Sam. Well, they get to his house and break into his car without a search warrant, and they find a lot of evidence, including a rifle, a map of the crime scenes, and a letter. So they wait for him to leave his apartment, and when he does, they ask him if he's David Berkowitz. And he responds with, "No, I am the son of Sam, and you got me." So once they found and arrested David Berkowitz, they brought him in for questioning. And it only took investigators 30 minutes to get him to admit to everything. And his reasoning behind the killings was because of a 6,000-year-old demon dog who was speaking to him through the dog of his neighbor. He was the one calling the shots and demanding him to kill. And one particular investigator that was very obsessed with this case, named Maury Terry, was wondering why he didn't match any of the sketches. It's normal for eyewitnesses to be wrong to some degree, but you wouldn't describe Berkowitz as being 6 foot and blonde. There was also some worry if the evidence would even hold up in court, because they got it without a search warrant. But in court, David admitted to everything, so they didn't even need evidence. He was sentenced 25 years to life for each murder. So, case closed, right? Well, if we look back to the letter, there's the name John Wheaties. Wheat Carr and John Carr are Sam Carr's children, Berkowitz's neighbors. And from looking at the eyewitness sketches, the sketches look more like John Carr, Sam's actual son. One of the most terrifying cults that I have learned about recently refers to themselves as the Children. And the reason that they terrify me so much is because they are related to so many other cults. Well, Scientology came about in 1953. And 2 members from this church, Robert D. Grimson and Marianne McLean, decided to leave it and start the cult of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. And they brought their satanic teachings to the US around the 1970s. Well, if you guys watched my previous video about the Son of Sam killings, which occurred in New York City around the 1970s, you might be able to connect these 2 things together. Well, the issue with this case is that 1 man was convicted. But it seems as though police really fudged this up. There was so much attention around this case that they were just looking to just put someone behind bars instead of actually doing full investigations. Well, one editor named Maury Terry ended up taking investigating into his own hands. And not only was he able to find a substantial amount of evidence and cryptic messages, but he was also able to find where the cult would meet up for their rituals, Devil's Cave. Well, it was rumored that there was a cult working in New York City that was an offshoot of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. They referred to themselves as the Children and ended up in Yonkers. Well, when Maury was doing his investigating, he was let know by several people that their rituals were done in Untermeyer Park, an estate that used to be absolutely beautiful. But as you can see from the pictures, there's now an abandoned pump house. And when investigating this, trigger warning, they found blood on the walls and blood on the ceiling, and symbolic writing. Not only this, but dead animals were everywhere, including specifically dogs. So then it was time to look back at David's letters, in which he made cultural references to Beelzebub, which is the demon known as Lord of the Flies, and Brat, which is a small devil. He also ended his letter as From the Gutters, which was quite literally the nickname for the abandoned pump house. And when holding how he signed his name at the end of the letters to the mirror, you can find the words Sam and Carr and Burke in it. So where were the actual sons of Sam, and why hadn't they been questioned? Well, after Maury had taken an investigation into his own hand and was seeing all these connections, he went to the police with it. And he was essentially just told to shut it down. That they had their man behind bars, there's no way other people worked with him, even though there was clear indications that he was working with a cult, and none of the eyewitness sketches even looked like him. So the last thing to do would be able to tie the sons of Sam to the actual case. So John, Michael, and Wheat Carr were all the kids of Sam, Michael and John specifically being the sons. After talking to neighbors, there were several stories about Sam beating them. Their father Sam struggled with alcoholism, and this was all included in the letter that David wrote. So Maury's like, okay, let's go do investigating in the place that they were from, Minot, North Dakota. And when they got to their hometown, they were told by everyone that they were legitimately cult leaders. There was accounts of them sacrificing dogs, drinking blood, all of the work. So Maury was like, okay, we need to actually get a hold of these guys. Maybe they'll be open to talking about it. But soon after that, it was reported that they both mysteriously died. So how did the other suspects mysteriously die, you might be asking? Well, one randomly unalived himself, while the other died in a mysterious car crash, which is entirely suspicious. So after adding all of this evidence together, they were able to release it to the public. And it made sense that Berkowitz would have had other people watching, other people holding the gun, other people doing the killings, all orchestrated by a cult leader. But because their main suspects for this case were now dead, there wasn't really much that they could do. Maury was trying to prevent this from happening again, though. Like, what if the children decide to send another member of theirs out? Either way, their parent cult, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, was neighbors to Charles Manson, and is where he got many of his own foundational ideas for his cult. So it's so clear that these connections run deep. Let me know what you guys think of this case. Let me know if there's anything in this that you want me to talk about next, like Scientology or Charles Manson, or if you want to hear more about the Process Church of the Final Judgment. So a lot of people argue that you should never look through your man's phone. But like, what if you just have that gut feeling that something's going on? And even worse, what if you do open his Snapchat and see a naked girl? So I downloaded this app called Wink and made a friend that we can call Shane. And even though Shane and I got really close over the phone, he lived in another state, so we never really got to meet. But one night he was coming home drunk from a hotel with his cousin, and I was coming home from a college party, and I said his cousin, who we can call PJ, was hot AF. And so Shane was like, oh my god, let me give you this man's snap. And a few months later, PJ and I were talking. And he agreed to drive the 4 hours to come to my state just to see me. I was busy cleaning my apartment that day preparing for him to come, and told him just to walk in when he gets here. So when this man came in, I kid you not, he walked in with a bouquet of flowers. And they were a dozen yellow roses, which he knew were my favorite. And after he left on Sunday, he asked if he could see me the next week, and I happily said yes. And before long, PJ and I started dating, but this happiness was soon to end. So welcome back to me finding nudes on my boyfriend's phone. I'm sorry, ex-boyfriend now. But seriously, guys, do not be love blind, because this guy literally was driving 4 hours to see me every week. He would call me on all of his breaks. All of my friends were completely won over by him. And it didn't take him long to win over my family too. And about a month in, he finally took me to meet his friends and family. Our lives meshed so well that he asked me to move in with him at a party that night. I was hesitant at first, but then I packed up all of my stuff out of my apartment and moved out of state to be with this man. And after all of that, this man switched it up on me. He stopped taking me to parties with him and started leaving on Friday afternoons while I was at work and wouldn't tell me where he was. He wouldn't come home until like 6 or 7 in the morning on Saturday. And then we would just argue the rest of the weekend about it. Like, sir, I moved away from my family, moved out of my apartment, quit my job for you. He was straight up treating me like it didn't matter, and I saw him going to his phone all the time and acting secretive. And eventually I couldn't take it anymore, so I opened his phone when he was sleeping. I also forgot to mention this giant red flag. We were no longer active. Like, this man had cut off our sex life. So when I grabbed his phone, the first Snapchat that I opened was from a girl who was touching herself. My heart stopped for a second, but I was like, okay, let me just give this man the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's just some girl trying to be sneaky, trying to pull one over him. But then I noticed that all of the recent snaps were from girls. So I started to go through all of his conversations and realized that he was messing with every girl on his snap. Every! And then there was this one girl who didn't have like sexual messages with him. They were more like lovey-dovey. But it went back to way before we were dating, so this man had never been faithful to me. I broke down, I blocked every girl on his snap, and then I threw his phone at his face to wake him up. I demanded to know why he cheated on me, and that's when he realized that I'd blocked all the girls and he freaked out and lunged at me. We got into an all-out brawl, and I broke my hand in the process and locked myself in the guest room. So this is, of course, where this man just, sprinkled on a little bit of his gaslighting. I locked myself in the guest room, and then he started to cry and act pathetic from the other side of the door. Just saying that he was sorry, that he effed up, and he never meant to hurt me, and it was all his fault. And in that moment, I didn't know what else to do. I unlocked the door and cried in his arms, terrified. And I needed to go to the hospital because my hand was literally broken from our fight. Because I had given up everything and I was so in love with him, I decided to work things out, but it literally only lasted a week. We made the decision to break up, but he convinced me to keep living with him. But we set up ground rules, which included no girls over at the apartment and him not talking bad behind my back. But of course, one night when we went out to a party, we got into a massive fight and he caused a scene. And he talked so much smack about me at this party that his friend, who's a girl, turned around and was like, hey, you need to come live with me. I packed up my things and left, but I ended up moving in with Shane, the cousin, instead. And then I got really drunk one night and slept with Shane. So, for the next part. So you might be wondering what happened after I slept with his cousin? Well, I felt awful because then me and PJ got back together a week later. You probably want to slap me, but he was different this time. He was caring, he was gentle, but literally I was not happy anymore. Everything felt so wrong. I decided to move back home with my sister, and as soon as I did, PJ started cheating on me again. And as soon as we broke up, I found out that I was pregnant. He ghosted me and left me to figure out things on my own. So I blocked him. And sadly, about a month after finding out I was pregnant, I ended up miscarrying. PJ ended up getting a new phone and started texting me and calling me and blowing up asking to talk. And that's when I realized he didn't even know that I had lost the baby. So I decided to end up talking to him and he tried to get me back. I was extremely confused during this time. I continued to move on and away from him, but then he started just harassing me on TikTok. He would admit to cheating on me in the comments, like bragging about it. And now he has a girlfriend, so I hope someone warns her. Okay, so who in the world would kill this beautiful Instagram influencer? Alexis Sharkey's death was just ruled as a homicide, and it has been on my brain all week. So Alexis was extremely smart, very much an overachiever. She graduated top of her class at the University of Pittsburgh and had big dreams of going to med school. However, she wanted to travel in the meantime, so she decided to take a break. So she went to Texas to work at a Twin Peaks. She had no issues making friends, but recently went through a breakup. But one of the girls she worked with at Twin Peaks noticed a thing going on between her and a regular. This guy's name was Tom Sharkey. He was an oil field consultant and traveled a lot for his job, which was perfect because that's why she was taking a break from college. They began dating and she started to work for the hair company Monet, which a lot of you guys know to be a pyramid scheme. However, Miss Girl was so good at it. She was making $400,000 a year as an executive director and traveling and posting it everywhere. Because of this, her Instagram rose to 20,000 followers. She met a lot of new friends and eventually Tom proposed. Go to part 2 to see the rest of the look. So Tom proposed to her and they moved to Colorado, and this is when she took up vlogging on YouTube. And they look absolutely precious. They seem like such a good couple. They seem like they're genuinely so happy in every single vlog, but the problem is you never really know what's truly going on based on social media. So her and Tom seem like the perfect couple. They get married, move to Houston together, and she joins Bumble BFF to make a new group of friends. She ends up finding a group that she meshes with really well and combining them with her Monet friends. Well, quarantine hits and she takes to TikTok. New way to promote yourself. Pretty much all of us went on TikTok after quarantine. So she was finally able to show more of her personality online, promote Monet, and she put Tom and her friends in it. You can still go look these up. And then her and one of her friends decided to go to Marfa, Texas, and then Tulum, Mexico. Keep this in mind. This is actually the last photo that she posted on her Instagram in Tulum. Anyways, by the time she got back, it was Thanksgiving, and she went to her friend Tanya's house for it. without Tom, which is so strange for newlyweds. I forgot to mention that her friends would say that she would barely even bring up Tom, which is so sus, but go to part 3 for the events that unfold. So she leaves her friend Tanya's house on Thanksgiving and lets Tanya know that she's going out to drink. She was picked up by a car, went out drinking until 3 a.m., and then texted Tanya on her way back to let her know she was coming back to pick up her car from her house. Well, the next day is Black Friday, which is a huge deal for people who run businesses, and she's obviously affiliated with Monet. And because she works from her phone, she's never off of it, like a story every other hour. All her friends wake up Black Friday, nothing. Nothing is on her social media. But that morning in the friend group chat, they get a text from her. She wanted to hang out and go out drinking, but none of them were free then, so they made plans for the next day. Well, the next day comes around, she doesn't show up, and no one's heard from her. So her husband Tom phones up John, one of her friend's boyfriends, and is like, hey, have you heard from Alexis? We got into a really bad fight last night, and I haven't seen her. She got into a black car, and I haven't seen her since. Sorry guys, here's the rhinestones. But his story kept changing. He would sometimes say she left in a black car, sometimes say she left on foot, would sometimes say that they had fought, would sometimes say that they didn't have a fight. She had her phone, didn't have her phone, or that he was even following her around on Find Friends. Go to the next part. So it is obviously sus that Tom keeps changing his story. My eyes are headed, so I'm gonna have to go up on the crystals. But her friends are extremely worried. No answer on the group chat. They still hung out hoping that she would show up, but never showed up. But Tanya gets extremely worried and calls Alexis's mom Stacy. It turned out Tom already talked to Stacy, and this is how they knew everything was getting really, really bad. So they took to social media, started posting everywhere, justice for Lex. But sadly, her body ended up being found. She was on the side of the road. Sadly, her body ended up being found. She was on the side of the road, completely naked, only a few miles from where she lived. Let me just say, her mom and the rest of her friends were beyond broken over this news. It's really important to note, though, that there was no signs of trauma. And because she's so beautiful and active on social media, the internet went crazy. They were thinking possibly drugs are involved, maybe a smothering. But her friends and family knew that this was no accident. And that's when the friend that she went on the Marfa trip with stated that Tom and Alexis were actually going through a divorce, and Alexis said she was scared for her life. And again, this is just what her friend said. We don't know for sure. But her friend was coming out with all this stuff about Tom sending Alexis nasty messages while they were on their vacation together. And that in Tulum, she met a man named Sebastian. And she was very, very interested in the Sebastian guy, and he was actually the friend that ended up picking her up the night they went out drinking, before she was found dead. Well, there's a lot of rumors about them already being together, potentially Tom already knowing, but we don't really know for sure right now. Well, the medical examiner's conclusion was that she was strangled. So now the entire internet is suspicious of Tom. She was strangled. So now the entire internet is suspicious of Tom. He's changed his story. He also referred to her in past tense before they found her body. But he's gotten an extreme amount of death threats and has kind of stayed away from being interviewed. He only did one quick phone interview and didn't even finish it. I'm sure his mental health is just awful right now. Weird thing to add to this is that he's the next of kin, so he was supposed to claim the body, but he ghosted Alexis's mom and never did. The medical examiner ended up giving her mom the power though, so they do have the body back now. And while there's a lot of people still suspicious of Tom, people are not shy to question Sebastian.